When we think of the wonders of the world, we usually imagine perfection, ideal proportions, flawless lines, a symmetry that has amazed people for centuries. But there is one place where everything went wrong, and yet it became an icon that cannot be confused with any other monument. This is the Leaning Tower of Pisa, a building that began to tilt even before its first floors were completed. And yet, it has stood for over 800 years. How is that possible? Why didn't it collapse even though for centuries it balanced on the edge of disaster? And how did a mistake turn into one of the most famous symbols in the history of architecture? This is a story of an unintended masterpiece, of medieval ambitions, surprising failures, and ingenious rescues, of how imperfection can create something monumental. This is the year 1173. Pisa is experiencing the golden age of its power, a city-state that, through maritime trade, accumulated immense wealth and ambition, competing for dominance with Florence, Genoa, and Venice. In medieval Italy, prestige was measured not only by the number of ships a city owned, but also by monumental buildings, cathedrals, palaces, and towering bell towers, which testified to the strength and culture of their creators. On the Campo dei Miracoli, the Field of Miracles, the magnificent cathedral already stood, with a massive baptistry beside it, forming an architectural duo worthy of Pisa's rising power. Yet one element was missing, intended to complete the composition and emphasize the city's aspirations: the campanile, an impressive bell tower meant to become the pride of the entire complex. The choice of location would later prove crucial, although initially no one had reason to suspect danger. The ground beneath the future tower was clayey and waterlogged, yet in the 12th century, the science we now call geotechnics did not exist. The foundations were planned to be only about 10 feet deep, the depth of a modern family home, not a massive 180 feet stone bell tower. Nevertheless, construction began with grandeur befitting the city's power. Heavy marble blocks, elegant columns, and richly carved works of art were set to create a tower that would become a symbol of Pisa's genius. No one suspected that each stone and column added would subtly bring the structure closer to the problems that would eventually transform it into one of the world's most famous architectural paradoxes. After just a few years of work, something happened that could have doomed the ambitious project. As the third story was being built, workers began to notice a worrying phenomenon: the entire structure literally sinking into the ground, yet only on one side. The tower started leaning to the south, and the uneven settling of the ground became increasingly apparent. At that time, no one could yet understand how catastrophic a signal this was, nor how extraordinary the story about to unfold would be. Construction was quickly halted. On one hand, it was a moment of deep crisis, one that could have ended in the complete abandonment of the project. On the other hand, paradoxically, it proved to be a saving grace for the structure. For nearly 100 years, Pisa was embroiled in wars and political conflicts, leaving no resources to continue the endeavor. This enforced pause allowed the ground, though unstable, time to partially settle under the weight of the unfinished tower. Construction resumed in the 13th century. The existing 3 stories were preserved, but the additional floors were built with a subtle yet noticeable correction in the opposite direction of the tilt. In this way, the entire structure gradually straightened as it rose, giving it its characteristic, slightly curved shape, often compared to a bent banana. It is one of the most remarkable architectural improvisations of the Middle Ages, the result of intuitive attempts based on experience, rather than the calculations that computers, simulation models, and advanced engineering programs perform today. Despite the lack of modern tools, many of these decisions prove surprisingly accurate, at least enough for the structure to continue growing and maintain balance. By 1372, nearly 2 centuries after construction began, the campanile was finally completed. Leaning, yet breathtakingly beautiful, it was already destined to become one of the most recognizable symbols in the world. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was built not just as a display of the city's architectural power, but primarily as a cathedral bell tower. Already in the Middle Ages, the tower housed 7 bells, each with its own tone and function, from marking the hours to calling the faithful to services. For centuries after its completion, the Leaning Tower of Pisa remained surprisingly stable. Its foundations settled slowly, yet evenly enough that the structure did not raise major concerns. Through the Renaissance, Baroque, and subsequent eras, the bell tower stood unshaken, surviving storms, strong winds, and even a few local seismic tremors. It was not until the 19th century that observers noticed the tilt gradually increasing, and the process threatened potential catastrophe. Attempts to straighten it proved ineffective or even worsened the problem. In 1838, engineers tried to relieve the base by removing some soil on the north side to help straighten the tower, but the result was the opposite, and the tower leaned even more. Another major intervention occurred in 1934, when cement was injected under the foundation to strengthen the ground. Unfortunately, this method also failed, partially destabilizing the soil and contributing to further tilting. By the 20th century, the situation had become truly critical. The tilt exceeded 5.5 degrees, and scientists predicted that a single major earthquake could bring the entire structure down. In 1990, the tower was closed to tourists. For the first time in centuries, the Piazza dei Miracoli fell silent, a monumental stillness marking the threat hanging over Pisa's symbol. An international team of engineers and geologists, led by Michel Jamielkowski, was assembled. Their mission was at once simple and extraordinarily complex: save the tower without completely straightening it, because its character, and with it, its legend, depended on its lean. The stabilization work required precision and immense patience, and the most effective technique proved surprisingly elegant in its simplicity. On the north side of the foundations, a series of small horizontal drill holes were made beneath the tower, each only a few centimeters wide. Through these holes, minimal amounts of soil were gradually removed, allowing the tilt to be reduced inch by inch, while the tower's movements were continuously monitored. At the same time, massive anchors and roughly 900 tons of heavy lead counterweights were installed to stabilize the entire structure. The result was spectacular. The tower straightened by about 15 inches, returning to the tilt it had around the year 1700. In 2001, it was declared safe for at least the next 200 years. This operation, combining precise engineering and brilliant intuition, became one of the most impressive and memorable architectural rescue missions in history. The entire operation cost 30 million euros and lasted over a decade. The Leaning Tower also played an important, though somewhat legendary, role in the history of science. Legend has it that in the late 16th century, a young mathematics professor, Galileo Galilei, climbed to the top of the tower holding 2 metal spheres, one heavy, the other much lighter. Students and professors from the university gathered at the base of the bell tower to witness what would become one of the most iconic experiments in the history of science. Galileo aimed to disprove a principle long held since antiquity, that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. When he dropped both spheres simultaneously from nearly 160 feet, they hit the ground almost at the same time. The tower thus became not only a backdrop for medieval architecture, but also a stage for one of the most important moments in scientific history, a symbol of the transition from reliance on authority to reliance on experiment, evidence, and reason. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was never meant to look the way it does today. Its tilt was not part of a bold plan, nor the architect's intention. It was the result of oversight, error, and a lack of geological knowledge, which no one at the time understood. And yet, or perhaps because of that, it became one of the most recognizable buildings in the world. Every day, thousands of tourists line up around it with cameras, pretending to hold up the monumental structure, a humorous gesture that soon entered global pop culture. But behind this light-hearted, playful act lies a much deeper story. That masterpieces can arise by chance, that imperfection can be beautiful, and that what strays from the norm can become a symbol of courage, creativity, and perseverance. The tower is not just an ancient bell tower. It is a monument to human resilience, to the science that learns from mistakes, and to architecture that has survived centuries of adversity. It reminds us that true greatness does not always lie in perfection. Sometimes it lies in the history that has endured against all odds. In a structure that was meant to fall, it instead became immortal. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Monumental Minds and click the bell to never miss another story. See you in the next episode, where history meets engineering and human creativity.